Before emails, before Discord servers and online forums, you could play turn-based games in the mail, waiting weeks in between moves, calculating the most advantageous position for your character or your team, and developing a rich in-game narrative while you wait. This was the world of play-by-mail gaming, an entire genre of role-playing that thrived through the postal system. For a few decades, it was one of the most creative and obsessive and weirdly romantic ways to play games.
Hey, you can play games on a board, on a computer, and even in your mind. But have you ever tried to play games by mail?
Hi everyone, my name is Lee, and today let's talk about play-by-mail games. They are what I consider to be the original turn-based MMOs. So imagine this, it's 1983, you're sitting at your kitchen table, you're writing a detailed letter to a game moderator describing your wizard's next move. Maybe you're negotiating peace with a rival kingdom, maybe you're trying to assassinate their ambassador or something. You seal up the envelope, drop it off the mail, and then you just wait. You might be waiting days, it could be weeks, it could be a whole month later, and you get a letter in return. Inside are the results written up like a little short story of what happened. Your attempt to poison the ambassador failed, the vial shattered in the courier's satchel, stuff like that. That was essentially play-by-mail, or a PBM game. It was correspondence, it was diplomacy, it was performance art, creative writing, all filtered through the relaxed pace of the postal system. The earliest instances of a long-distance correspondence game can be dated all the way back to the 10th century. Later, in the 12th and 13th centuries, there are also well-documented cases of correspondence chess between European nobles and scholars. By the 18th century, it was pretty widespread. There were chess clubs like the Paris and London chess societies that would play multi-year matches all entirely through the mail. Fun fact, apparently Humphrey Bogart of Casablanca was an avid chess player, and he also played quite a bit of correspondence chess with GIs overseas after he filmed Casablanca. Rumor has it in 1943 he was visited by the FBI, who prevented him from playing any more correspondence chess because they were reading his mail and they thought that the chess notation he was sending to Europe was some sort of secret code. But anyway, Go and Chinese chess are both extremely old games, and they date back over 2,500 years. There's no archaeological or textual record suggesting that they were actually played through correspondence before the modern day. However, China does have a long tradition of literary correspondence games, like collaborative poetry exchanges, where poets would send each other verses and respond in kind. These quote-unquote poetic duels are kind of like turn-based creative exchanges. Not competitive games in the modern sense, but conceptually kind of similar to a role-playing correspondence that play-by-mail games would later emulate. So while China had the concept of a turn-based creative correspondence back in the day, it wasn't really used for formal games until much later. And this is all kind of speculation. In the 1960s and the 70s, as wargaming and Dungeons & Dragons were starting to catch on, we have Rick Loomis, who entered the tabletop scene. Loomis was a US war veteran who was an avid wargamer, and he founded the company Flying Buffalo in 1970. He created a game called Nuclear Destruction, which became one of the first multiplayer play-by-mail strategy games. Loomis quickly realized that handling turns manually was too slow for the hundreds of players that wanted to be in the game. So in 1972, he teamed up with fellow soldier Steve McGregor, who wrote a computer program to moderate the games for them. They bought a Raytheon 704 mini computer and invested that into their company, and this innovation made Flying Buffalo the first company to run commercial-scale play-by-mail games efficiently. An excerpt from an interview with him says, "I had invented a multiplayer game called Nuclear Destruction, which was a little different from diplomacy in that it had hidden movement. Thus, the moderator had to send different information to each player. All of this gaming kept my mailbox full of letters, which was the primary purpose back then. But soon I had over 200 players in my game, and it was becoming difficult to keep up. So I asked my friend Steve McGregor to write a computer program for me, which would run the Nuclear Destruction game. We rented time on a control data computer, which was near the fort where he lived at the time." His most famous play-by-mail title ended up being Star Web from 1976, which was a science fiction strategy game that attracted thousands of players worldwide. Beyond play-by-mail, Rick Loomis also helped shape a lot of the tabletop RPG history that we know today. Flying Buffalo published Tunnels and Trolls, one of the earliest role-playing games after Dungeons & Dragons, and later produced classics like Grim Tooth Traps and Nuclear War. By the 1980s, play-by-mail was thriving in both the US and the UK. Across the pond in the UK, companies like KJC Games and Harlequin Games ran massive worlds that were filled with fantasy, sci-fi, and there was the typical political intrigue and wargaming as well. They were games like Earthwood, It's a Crime, Legends, Tribes of Crane, and Empyrean Challenge. In comparison to a lot of the stat-heavy, number-crunchy wargames, some of these play-by-mail games really started to hone in on storytelling and character development. Players would write long, in-character letters, sometimes pages of dialogue, there was scheming, and there was emotional reflection. Games like Delenda Est Carthago, where you roleplay as a family living in a fantasy land set in medieval Earth kind of times, blurred the line between role-playing and creative writing. The game was more about diving into the roleplay of your family and what they kind of got up to in the world than the combat aspects, which were still part of the game. One player recalled from a Delenda game that participants even researched medieval cultures and languages to make their characters feel more authentic and lived in. So the game masters of these games weren't just the referees, they were also writers, they were participants, they were weaving together hundreds of players' letters into one evolving story each turn. For many of these strategic war games, in contrast to this, computers were the ones that were moderating the games. For the more story-focused play-by-mail games, they were a hybrid. Sometimes they were hybrid moderated, with humans GMing to deal with the story aspects and computers to just deal with all the combat. If your plan was clever and you had a really great idea, a human GM could reward it accordingly. If something dramatic might happen that would make the story better, but maybe it doesn't quite follow the rules, the human GM could bend the rules to keep the story alive. That personal touch, the sense that someone was truly writing the game with you, made play-by-mail role-playing really feel alive, especially after you have to wait weeks or days after you sent in a turn. It really made all your decisions feel a lot more dynamic and what's the word? Meaningful. It really made it feel meaningful. In contrast, the typically computer-moderated war/strategy play-by-mail games were not afraid of killing your character or your team that you might have spent the last months or years building simply because someone entered in the numbers wrong into the charts. Playing play-by-mail games required patience. You could spend hours on your move, you could spend days thinking about what you were gonna do, you mail it off, and then you wait. Sometimes for weeks, sometimes a month per turn. Some games had a single monthly term, some were every 2 weeks. But the waiting became part of the whole play-by-mail experience. It gave players the chance to really marinate in their characters, in your decisions, in the world building. Every turn held more gravity, since you can only make so many turns in a game per year or per month. You really had to commit to the actions and the choices of your characters. Even though you might only get one official turn every X number of days or weeks, people would still chat and discuss their characters and motives and moves freely in between the official in-game actions, so you could be spending a lot of your time thinking about what your character was gonna do, what kind of plans your whole team was gonna make. It really was a full immersive experience. There were also magazines like Flagship and Gaming Universal that started coming out that were full of player reports specifically for play-by-mail games. They had reports, advice, classifieds, looking for new games, looking for players. Some people even met lifelong friends or romantic partners through playing play-by-mail games. It truly was a bustling and thriving community that connected people who otherwise might have never met. In 1988, there was a fun little evolution in the technological age of role-playing games. It's not quite play-by-mail, but I thought it was kind of a fun segue in before technology really took over and changed the landscape of PBM. Steve Jackson, the co-founder of Games Workshop, launched a series of single-player telephone-based role-playing games based on the fighting fantasy books that they had released prior, the Fighting Fantasy Choose Your Own Adventure books. The game was called Fantasy Interactive Scenarios by Telephone, aka Fist. You would call in and create a character which could be saved and restored in the next time that you called in. The two games that they released were Castle Mammon, Lair of the Demon Prince, and a sequel to that called Rings of Alion, were both dungeon crawls that you would choose your own adventure through.
Audio Entertainment presents Castle Mammon, the most thrilling adventure of your life, played over your telephone. Listen for unexpected surprises in the dungeon of Castle Mammon. This is the audio game you've been waiting for. Call 1-900-230-9090 to find out how to play. You're the main character and you determine the outcome. What makes this a real adventure is gold. Over-announced for first prize. Calls are $1.50 for the first minute and 75 cents each additional minute. Kids, get your parents' permission. Call 1-900-230-9090 now.
They had sound effects and voiceovers that illustrated the adventures of your character. Combat was a description of what your opponent was doing over the phone, and you would end up pressing various buttons or a combination of buttons to respond. The game could even be saved, and you could quit, and you could reload your save the next time you called in using a player-specific code. It was a solo game, but you could hear the high scores of the other players who also played, and physical gold coins were awarded monthly to the top scorers. There was also the Black Claw Tavern, which was a group discussion phone line that would connect you to other adventurers that were all calling in at the same time. Inevitably, technology shifted the trajectory of the play-by-mail industry.
Imagine a world where every word ever written, every picture ever painted, and every film ever shot could be viewed instantly in your home via an information superhighway. And in fact, that's already happening on something called the internet, that anyone in the world with a computer and a modem to connect it to a telephone line can subscribe to.
First came email, and then web forums, then MMORPGs. Instant methods of communication and computer moderation started to take away what made PBM so special in the first place. Some play-by-mail companies tried to adapt by moving their systems to a hybrid email/postal service combination or shifting entirely to email-based turns, but the boom from the 80s onwards had ended. Rising postage costs and the novelty of the internet made PBM companies harder to stay afloat. A lot of the ones that had opened solely to make a PBM commercially run game ended up closing. Some play-by-mail games did adapt and fully embrace the new technology, like World Conquest. In 1995, World Conquest shifted to be entirely online, and it ended up being available to be played hourly instead of bi-weekly or daily. In Japan, play-by-mail games became popularized by the company Yuentai, who referred to them as net games. Net games would typically last 1 year, where you would get one official in-world action every month, and usually at the end of the game, they would even have a real-world meetup afterwards. Some years, they even published a commemorative book that chronicled major game events from that year. Japan's first official commercial play-by-mail game was Netgame 88. Netgame 88 was based on Japanese legends and combined some Cthulhu mythos and elements, letting players choose whether they wanted to be humans or monsters. At its peak, NetGames probably had around 10,000 players at the same time. The most successful net game that Yuentai did was called Horai Gakuen, or Horai High School, which later expanded into 2 separate tabletop RPGs, several novels, and it even had a Super Famicom game. The net games were quite popular in Japan and something of like legend to a lot of the veterans of the tabletop industry today. Netgame 91 was called At the Edge of Infinity. It was about a research facility that was exploring alternate realities. Netgame 93 was called Yozakura Ninja Scrolls, and it was a comedy about battling ninja schools. So after the first game that they had in 1988, Yuentai ran a game pretty much almost every year from 1990 all the way until 1998, before they swapped to online-only games for a short period of time, and then kind of disappeared from the industry as a whole. While Yuentai has basically disappeared, it's not sure if they've been officially disbanded, but there were several companies that were started by former members of Yuentai that are active and still influential in the tabletop industry in Japan. Arclight was started off as the Kanda office of Yuentai, but separated to become their own company in 1998. They now publish board and card games, and they also run Game Market, which is the largest analog game event in Japan. Meanwhile, in Germany, the creators of The Dark Eye, which is like a extra crunchy, rules-heavy fantasy role-playing game, reportedly also had a play-by-mail correspondence-type game called Briefspiel that started in 1988 and was run by the publisher at that time. And it has transitioned now to an exclusively play-by-email game. It ran pretty much since 1988, and at its height, it had over 100 people in the exact same game at the exact same time. There are other instances of PBM games that have spanned across different countries and over multiple decades. Things like Middle-earth Play-by-Mail, which was a strategy game inspired by Lord of the Rings, which is still ongoing today, and Monster Island, which was also quite popular across both the US and the UK, and it was also kept alive because they swapped to doing everything online. So play-by-mail never fully disappeared. There are still a lot of servers out there online dedicated to play-by-email games and play-by-post through forums. And a lot of people are also active on Discord, where, you know, GMs will just leave a running game where you can just type in a response every couple days or every couple hours. Modern games like Thousand Year Old Vampire, Alice is Missing, and De Profundis also use things like letters and journaling and other types of asynchronous play that will slow down storytelling and make it more reflective and kind of keep that emulative feeling of the play-by-mail style. There's also a game called Pray by Letter, which was a Japanese epistolary tabletop game where players exchange handwritten letters and prayers and responses, which you build a shared story through the mail. You're not sending things through the mail, but the story is being told through letters that you're writing and exchanging, so kind of like a mini play-by-mail. Play-by-mail gaming represents something that we've lost kind of along the way. The idea that stories and imagination can be moved at the pace of real life and still feel exciting and alive. The benefits of play-by-mail games are also things like being able to stick to a very specific tone and theme of a game. For example, like a horror or supernatural game. There's gonna be less riffing of, you know, inside jokes towards comedy or things like that through banter at the table. And the GM and the players can really commit to solely what their character's actions are gonna be, and you are gonna be less easily influenced from other people talking at the table. The appeal of the PBM genre is summed up really nicely in this excerpt from the Greyhawk Grognard blog that I found. What these sorts of games bring that few others do is time. Time to savor the situation, time to drink it in, to plot and plan, time to have multiple conversations with folks before you need to get your orders in. And then, of course, the delicious wait while you scowl at the mailbox, wondering why that damned game master hasn't sent your turn back. You could get that with a play-by-email game, but there's also something so visceral about getting that envelope in your hands and poring over the results in a hard copy. It's a very different experience than the instant gratification in modern computer games. It's also different than a face-to-face game, as the negotiations can get really, really involved, and of course, the number of potential players is vastly different. Thank you so much for watching this video with us today. I hope that you learned something. I hope that this was interesting. It was a super fun and interesting video for us to research. So let us know in the comments if you've ever played a play-by-mail game back in the day with physical letters and stuff, or if you participate in any play-by-mail forums or a Discord server or emails. And if you don't play any or haven't tried it, let us know if there's a game that you want to try that maybe you would be willing to try through a correspondence type of situation. Thank you so much for watching. A huge thank you to our beautiful patrons. Thank you so much for supporting us all the time, and we really appreciate it. If you like this video, feel free to give us a little like, a little subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, we will see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you.